I'm screen sharing. Okay. Well, I guess you might as well start. I'm hoping that there's the people who are on hybrid are actually seeing what's going on here, but I'm not technologically adept enough to know. Except apparently we have 5 participants now, so that it's at least suggesting that there is some kind of connection going on here. Thank you guys for showing up for our panel session on risk and supply chain resilience, lessons from the pandemic that Brent and I set up. And if you're wondering about the brackets around the risk, and that was originally we had some draft and we weren't sure if we were including those words, but somehow they stayed there. And actually I thought, actually it looks kind of cool to have those brackets around it. So we just left it in. But the deal was, I'll just read what we had for our description, is that while agricultural sector has been reasonably resilient in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic, the question remains of whether the supply disruptions that did occur were greater than socially optimal. One can argue that producers at the firm level have less concern with taking action to reduce supply chain vulnerability to shocks than is optimal at the societal level. However, while increasing the resilience of agricultural supply chains could reduce the potential for large swings in prices, it could also decrease the production efficiency and raise mean prices. So the idea for this session is to start with a discussion of the conceptual framework, then move to issues in transport, trade, developing countries, and the role of federal policy. So we have David Zilberman, we have Mei-Lin Ma, and we have Brent, and David, unfortunately, AAEA scheduled him for 2 sessions at the same time. And originally he asked us to present his slides, but that's of course a little bit scary to have to do like a, Zilberman economics on his slides. But we were very lucky that David yesterday recorded his slides. So I'm actually hoping here, if I turn this on, and I think it was working there, we can actually have David do his presentation, and he may try to slip into this room sometime during the presentation. But let's see what happens here. Oh, we're going to do we'll do the presentations first and then open up for questions if that's okay. I was originally hoping we could do some kind of a panel setup where everyone's we're all sitting at the usual panel table and having discussions, but I'm not sure, just looking at the technology is not really allowing that. So we kind of still have to do it in sort of one at a time kind of thing. Okay, let's try to open this up. Uh-oh, right? Okay, it says you are screen sharing, but let's do a new share and see what happens here. Okay, yeah, okay, let's do that. This is too much technology for me. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Now,
good afternoon. This is David Zilberman, and I will present
what do you maximize?
A presentation about about the supply chain, as well, and how we can apply our work in supply chain in terms of data collection and empirical analysis. Okay. So I'll start with the motivation, introduce some theory, some of the implications, the data needs, and the conclusion. Now, the starting point of my analysis is economic theory that was formed in the 19th centuries when agricultural was a dominant industry, perfect competition ruled. And the model of Adam Smith reflects reality, but things have changed. And the agricultural economy, like Theodore Schultz realized it. We have high rate of innovation. We have new supply chains. We have monopolistic power. So we really live in a world where the basic assumptions of economic theory doesn't work. And to some extent, as an economist, one of our challenges is to develop a new theory and understanding. In particular, one of the key elements of the new reality is the prominence of supply chain. Supply chains are very important in agriculture. They dominate a lot of the industries, from wheat to fruit and vegetables and livestock. And if you want to see what how agriculture works, you need to understand the supply chain, as we saw in the recent pandemic. Now, we really distinguish in our analysis between 2 points: the innovation supply chain, the system that develop new innovation, and the product supply chain, which is the system that takes the innovation and implement it. And the product supply chain is especially important in order to understand how new innovation operates in agriculture. When we look at the system supply, at the product supply chain, we realize that generally we have several stages in this system. We have innovators that come with new technology. We have farmers that produce it. A lot of times the innovator is a processor, and then you work with retailers to sell the product. And this type of supply chain may rely on vertical integration, may have contracting, and in many cases rely on marketing. Now, to understand a little bit more about the innovation supply chain, I have to recognize to introduce the notion of educational industrial complex. There are 2 ways through which innovation enters our world. On one hand, the university researchers come with an idea, they take the idea, they make sure that it's valid, and this idea may provide a foundation to a product. It can be machinery, it can be some of service, and generally what happens is that the scientists work with stuff and maybe with a big company to develop a product. Another way that we have supply chain is that someone comes with the idea, and then we have a product design company that takes the idea forward. That's the way that Edison was working. That's the way that Ford was working. They basically use existing knowledge to develop.
By the way, I found a
Now, what I'm really
Vaseline
the design of the
Oh, where'd you find it?
underneath your sink.
how you
What happens when you look?
designing the
I
supply
didn't realize, or I would have never done it.
If you do assess future demand, you try to have the best prediction of future demand, because if there is no demand,
I don't know if
there
actually
is
give
no
a message.
supply. So I think
Talk
this
to us
is
for a
a
second.
very important stage in any supply chain, and I've done it myself for companies to try to see.
Excuse me, if
You may not
no one
be.
is attending online, if they're speaking in the background, can you turn off your mic, please? Thank you.
Over time, what will be the adoption process? What will be the income? Who will buy it? Where will they buy it? It's very, very important to have a good ability to predict what will happen to a new product. Then you really have to design the supply chain, and you generally develop a plan that maximizes net expected present value. You have to show it to bankers. So you have to show net present value. And in order to do, and what you do in this optimization, determine the quantities of different intermediate products, you determine how much you produce internally and how much you buy from others, decide if you have contracts, and contract to vertical integration or rely on market, and then there are a lot of constraints. Some of the constraints are physical constraints. You don't have enough land, you don't have expertise, but credit is very, very important, because early stages, supply chain may be financed by venture capital, hedge fund. Later on, they may be financed by stock and bonds, and financial arrangements change throughout the life of the supply chain. And the ability to get finance is crucial in designing supply chain. And policy affects supply chain. That's the reason that finance and policy are so important. So here I think about a simple supply chain. It has 3 stages. You have feedstock, you produce, let's say, grain. It can be produced in-house, or you can produce it, or you can buy it from others, and by farmers. Then you process it, and then you can decide how much to sell it to restaurants and how much to sell it to retailers. Wine. A winery may have their own grapes, they buy grapes from others. They produce the wine, they have different types of wine. Some go to restaurants, some goes to supermarkets, and then it goes to the consumer. Another example, flowers in Kenya. People start growing flowers in Kenya. They basically, at the beginning, they they were vertically integrated, produce the flour and process them. But after a while, they start buying from flour. Again, people that produce flour sell some of it to retailers, to Safeway, and some of it they sell to florists. Now, so the basic calculation to determine the structure of supply chain is maximize net present value of revenues from all the sources, minus marketing cost, minus processing cost, which depend on capital and labor, minus the cost of production in-house, minus the cost of expenditure buying from others, minus investment in processing. So altogether, you take it all into account and you discount it. You take into account that you build new capital that basically is based on all capital plus invested minus depreciation, and you get some sort of rules. One basic rule is a marginal benefit from any final product is equal to marginal cost from all the activities that produce it. So throughout the supply chain, if you have multiple activities, the ratio between the marginal benefit and marginal cost is the same. The other thing is that the marginal benefit of investment at each period is equal to the net present value of the marginal cost of capital over time. So the optimization is constrained by availability and cost of capital. And again, it's influenced by policy. Now, generally, if you have an innovation that is started by an entrepreneur, the entrepreneur has a lot of power to determine the market structure. And generally, entrepreneurs will really start with some sort of monopolistic structure. Now, if there are many similar products, you have monopolistic competition. So all the wineries are in monopolistic competition. If you have a unique product like Apple Computer, you have a middleman, monopolistic in the output side, monopolistic in the input side. But the innovator always starts the product. So a company like Apple or a company that produces a unique product can charge a lot and have a big margin. A company that produces non-unique product cannot charge a lot and their margin will be very small. But generally speaking, whoever starts a company expects some sort of margin. Now, the supply chain may start at a given location. For example, Walmart started at Arkansas, and then it will move from one place to another. So this element of expansion is very, very important. Generally speaking, it may move overseas, like McDonald's did. And in order to do it, you need to have partners. Sometimes you will try to expand overseas and engage in foreign direct investment, and other local partners will invite you. So to some extent, you have this expansion and you change the product to local conditions. So that's what really happened for many agricultural supply chain. Even with food supply chain, you see that you change your product to affect what people like. So the bananas that are consumed in the US and Europe or Russia are different to slightly because of differences in preferences of consumers. Now, one of the key elements of modern supply chain is adaptation to shocks. All the time when you have a new product, you innovate all the time. For example, the lettuce industry was stagnated since they invented pre-cut lettuce, and when they invented pre-cut lettuce, at the beginning they sold it to restaurants, later on they start selling it to consumer, and they start selling pre-cut salads. Pivoting basically is the redesign of supply chain with respect to stock. So during the pandemic, what happened, a lot of supermarkets suddenly start introducing systems that can bring you the product at home. Google, for example, Uber developed Uber food. So supply chain adapt all the time to shocks, and that's something that is really important when we develop a model and analysis of supply chain. Now, all this idea of pivoting is consistent with Pendak and Dixit analysis. The shock led to adaptation. If the reward is big, people will switch. Now, what are the data? We need a lot of data if you want to analyze supply chain. I don't really think if we can have good understanding of agriculture without having good data. And we really need to know about the structure of the supply chain, who are the participants, who own it, the nature of the ownership, the financial arrangement. That's very, very difficult. You need to know when we have financed, under what conditions we have vertical integration, contracting, cooperative, reliance on market. That is one thing. We need data on the structure of supply chain. We need to have data on transaction. Who is buying, who is selling, what quantity, what type of product, what's the price. Data on transaction is very, very important. We need to have data on labor and variable input. It's very important to understand what are the costs of a supply chain beyond the farm gate. Because a lot of time farmers complain they get low prices. The question, are they low? No. Okay. Another thing is technology adoption. What type of technologies they adopt, when and how. And then we need a lot of time to learn about the narrative. We need to know the story because we're opposite before we obtain numbers. We need to distinguish between a census that you know what are the big supply chain and the ongoing activity. So it's a huge challenge that the USDA is finding. So what are my conclusions? The educational industrial complex is the key driver of innovation. Agriculture become more privatized. We need to develop that we have a system of innovation produced by the public and private sector. That generally speaking, innovation results in establishment of new supply chain, and this new supply chain results in non-competitive behavior that evolves over time. And the magnitude of supply chain depends on our ability to deal with credit and risk. And when you have new product, when you have some sort of monopoly, you don't have perfect competition. So another implication is we say we need to go beyond the farm gate. We need to study value chain, explain the design, the role of uncertainty, the linkage between research and product quality, the adaptation to new technologies, for example, robots, IT, biotech, and how climate change will affect supply chain. Assess the impact of supply chain on various groups of the economy, impact of policy on innovation and performance of supply chain, for example, trade policy, IPR, regulation, credit, investment in data is very important. And I think that at the end, we will move from ag policy to agri-food policy, from ag policy to agri-food policy. I hope that you enjoyed. I wish I could be with you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to make this presentation. And it was really a pleasure to be here. Thanks. Bye.
Okay, thank you very much, David, for that presentation. Now, I have to apologize to everybody. I actually introduced at the beginning, I introduced tomorrow's pandemic shock and supply chain presentation, that symposium that also has David in it. Today's is actually the leveraging business microdata to monitor pandemic. But you know, they like in other shocks and in a supply chain perspective, but they're really, they're overlapping subjects. So I think, so I have my confusion there, and you might see some of the same, I'm sure David will have some of the similar thoughts tomorrow. But unfortunately, this also means I have to reinstall my presentation here because I put in the wrong one. So bear with me for a second here. Sorry about that, folks. Sorry, Brent. Sorry, Malin. Okay. That's a good start to type. Let's try this. Okay. Okay, it says I'm screen sharing. So, yeah, I was hoping we were gonna be able to do a regular panel session where people, the panelists that speak, they're sort of sitting in a row, but then yes, I realized I probably don't have the technology to do that here. So at the last minute, I created some slides for my notes because I'm glad I did, because it looks like we can't actually do a traditional panel setup here. So while David talked about using innovation to spur resilience to shocks, I'm going to focus much more on the immediate needs and just in data. And so you have, on the one hand, you have what you want to do for the long run, and that's to spur innovation and your theoretical and data needs there. On the one hand, we also have the immediate needs, short-run needs of providing support so that producers can get through, the initial stages of, let's say, the immediate shock that's at hand, and then you hope you can build in resilience that can address shocks in the future. So I'm going to talk a bit about what we actually, our lessons from our pandemic support. And well, I guess you can call it the COVID pandemic. I think that falls into the shock category. So well, I think it's appropriate for a panel. So you guys all remember when COVID started first hitting in the early part of 2020. The government responded with the CARES Act signed into law in late March of 2020. And at least when it came to agriculture, it was very open-ended. It had I don't think it was more really than a few sentences specifying what the legislation was going to do in terms of agriculture, and it was up to USDA to implement some of the supports to assist producers with their in the damages due to the shocks. And our first program, which is the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, was rolled out only 2 months after the legislation was passed, and there are a lot of pieces of that. We were pretty busy, but the work is still going on in terms of the pandemic, where we have many programs. I did put a link here, and my idea was to actually click on that link and show you all the different programs. But now I'm kind of worried if I click on that link, I don't know what's going to happen if I can get back to the slides. So it's that guys will just have to go, just type in pandemic assistance, coronavirus, and you'll probably find the site here on farmers.gov, but you'll see all kinds of stuff there, and it's all kinds of points on the supply chain. And it's whether a lot of it's farm gate, but there's support for many others, which I'll get into over here. And if you just look at what we did for this is for the FSA administered support, pretty substantial, and we did we had $24 billion worth of expenditures in calendar year 2020. It's about 7.4 in 21, and it's going to be lower for 2022. I don't have official numbers. You could probably see some estimates if you went to like the ERS farm income forecast. They have numbers for the shock, but I can't present unofficial numbers. But this doesn't represent the full budget aspects, because there were other programs. There was $700 million for biofuel producers that was administered by AMS. We had support for timber haulers, so as you can imagine, that's a Forest Service thing. There's food nutrition. So certainly, other points along the supply chain. And I think this is all about the data. I think I might have stole this from you, Brent, but did I get that from you? But anyway, I took it before you. And it really, in trying to address all of a sudden what we had to do, given we had the mandate to set up some programs to support farmers, is what you need, and others, you need to have the data. And so when I think of the title for this session is leveraging business microdata. And when I think of microdata, I'm really thinking largely of federal government supplied data, because we really found as we were setting up these programs, that proprietary data is hard to use. Really, the only proprietary data I think you ever used would have been futures prices. And but of course that's you get a national price there, and no one's going to really argue about your yellow corn #2 price. And we got people in this room who had direct experience, Ashley in particular, who knows all about these issues. And other problems with data that's not public data. It's expensive. Say have licenses for it. If we did use private data, can we actually put it into the rule? It's nice to be transparent, and if you got data that you can't publish, that seems to be a problem. Non-federal data might not be national in terms of geographic scope. If you have some kind of a shock, unless it's you're talking about ad hoc assistance for a tornado or something, if it's something completely systemic like COVID, you're going to need data that's going to cover all producers of the commodity at whatever level you're going to be talking about in the supply chain. So what are you going to, if it's proprietary data sets, or if it's some state data, it's going to cover data for a particular location. So if we're going to start assembling, data from regional sets into one that's national in scope, that's going to be, I think, difficult and costly to support in the long run. And the one question is, it's one thing to also do that for a standing program. Can we assume all like future shocks with sort of systemic shocks have the same kind of form, that have the same data needs? I don't know. But so we've been getting some input from specialty crop groups lately, and I've been interested in helping us. How can we help you guys get some more data? We tended to do things in national data, especially for CFAP 1, and I guess they're happy with that. But they would certainly like it if we could tailor or support down to the local level. And so also for CFAP 1, all the commodities we did, everything was at national. We like for instance, if it was look at field crops, we did a price loss calculations all at national level, and that's fine. Corn, wheat, soybeans, and cotton. But what do you do when you get to specialty crops? I forgot what we had, maybe like 240 of them in there, and we came up with payments to address falls in prices, payments to address the producers inability to ship because of disruptions, and like a payment for commodities that perished on the field. So the producer would have to supply the production data, but what are you gonna do, for instance, for the price data? How are you going to calculate the cost? You can't, it just wasn't. It obviously was not particularly easy to come up with prices. And by the way, they were all national prices for the crops we could do it for. So it's pretty tough. Whatever we want to do, we want to be able to cover everyone who could be affected in a particular sector, whether it's specialty crops and all that. So you want to have data that's adaptable for doing that. And I guess another approach could be to try to. NASA's covered like Joe Parsons just came in here. I was just mentioning NAS data, but it has, for instance, when it comes to specialty crops, I think there has been a decrease over time in the number of crops covered, and they will cover also at a regional level. They will cover the principal growing regions, but they can't cover everybody who might be growing, and there is difference in prices across the country. So, but you just don't increase that data collection willy-nilly, and you got to have the money for it. And so if you try to get the money from non-federal sources, where it could be state extension, are you gonna have it for some places and not for others? Are we gonna apply like data from Washington State to to Oregon, to someplace or to some place that just some state that may have one apple producer? Not so, and the data, and if that data is something that we can trust. So there's data issues are pretty important, and they're just endless issues, even just using oh, I guess I have some repetition here, using private data. It became so complicated doing this that for CFAP2, when we came with specialty crops and other commodities, first we tried doing like a notice of funds availability to try to get more input on prices and all certain commodities. So we did do some updates. The rules got updated with new prices, but that was very time consuming for the staff to do. And so we have to think for the future if we want to get very detailed at the commodity level. And again, this would be at any point on the supply chain. How do you do it? We did for CFAP2 for the sales commodities. It was mostly specialty crops, but other commodities that are smaller. Whether it's I think we had emus, for instance, so that that wouldn't be something that we'd probably be spending a lot of time trying to figure out a unique program for. So it was sort of it's a place where we fit all kinds of commodities that we cannot easily develop individually tailored programs for. We actually ended up asking the producers for their revenues, say 2000. For in this case, here it would have been for 2020, and make payments based on that. We had some ways we calculated payment rates. So it was self-certification. So that was one way to address that. But I know that some market participants, they are concerned about the long-term, the political economy of self-certification approaches. I think they would certainly prefer approaches where you have, for instance, you would have like rates calculated, based and based on on our calculations rather than farmer supplied calculations. And then you start thinking about, well, now that's just farmers, that's a farm gate alone. What about other places? What about other what about even farmers who are actually who don't own the product, or contract growers? Where do you get data on them? ARMS will have data on contract growers, but that's not easy to use necessarily for operating one of these programs, because the data has lags. So you have to come up with ways. Well, how do we take farm gate values and translate them down to a contract grower level? So and so let's imagine if you just have these problems. We have a pretty good amount of farm data, so you can imagine at other points in the supply chain where that could get pretty complicated. It was somewhat complicated with timber growers to figure out, timber haulers figure out how to do that. Fortunately, Forest Service did most of that. So yeah, so maybe for like a standing program, you can take the time to figure out how to tailor programs for individual commodities, as crop insurance would do. But what do you do for unforeseen shocks? That's which is the subject of this topic here. It's just not. It's something will take a lot of thinking to do, but I think we hope we can do it. And certainly the kind of work which David is doing, which would be the spurring sort of like the next step, which is to try to induce changes to improve resiliency, is probably a place where you can spend more time thinking about how to collect data, collect data and data needs. And we talk about leveraging microdata. It's also worthwhile to think about, in some cases, we depending on how you design a program, we might want really microdata. Ideally, you want information at the farm level. If there's a program that's going to be based on the difference between a producer's revenue and between two periods, well, now you're starting to get into into revenue variability issues. And if you're trying to estimate the cost of these programs, you want to account for farm level variability. And there's been ways in crop insurance, people who've been working on that risk management have taken parameters, for instance, you can take a base premium rate, you can take NASC county estimates, and you can try to come up with some kind of measure of farm level yield variability for commodity and And I'm not quite sure how you would do that for livestock, but you do have to think about, it's just, the farm level can make a big difference in the sort of the mean value of the payments. When we're talking about some payment, like in CFAP1, we have payments to to field crops. There, you're basing the payment on a change in price multiplied by let's say by recent production. So you could look at that in aggregate, and you would have like and your mean would not be underreported. So how do we think more about trying to get down to the actual producer level? That was actually biofuel support needed some assumptions to be made. If you try to forecast costs of that program, because that's a program tied to changes in biofuel producer revenue. And that's the same thing for timber haulers too. You have to come up with ways to get down to the producer level. And so, we really, David presented a holistic, empirical model for talking about the supply chain. Of course, we didn't do that with pandemic support. It was, at least, the model was in human form. We certainly economists did not run any kinds of optimization models to think about how the available money could be allocated across the supply chain. We'd generally focus on particular points in supply chain as determined by leadership, and look at the costs there, and how and try to figure out ways that to give informed discussion on what could be the payment mechanisms. So for rapid turnaround, it's really so complicated, quantitative models are just not going to. There's probably not really a place for those, because you don't have the time. Or for something like actually with COVID, the initial shocks were so large, they tend to be. There's some of these shocks were largest seen since the Depression. And we got shocks that large and outside the bounds of historic data and the big structural models, you probably would not have very accurate results anyway. And as we may discuss more in tomorrow's meeting as well, you won't have a lot of these commodities and then available structural models anyway. So you need to think of simpler things, or these kind of reduced form approaches. But when we're starting to think about building resilience, then we can start thinking about perhaps actually find some more use for like more innovative thinking in modeling, to spur innovation. So let's see. So that's the end of my slides, and I think next is okay, Malin. It's like Brent goes next. I think it makes sense for his stuff to go next, and then you go on. Okay, close mine here. Hopefully, I don't cause damage here. Come closest so you can. Maybe you have more luck here. Okay, there we go. Maybe close David here. Grab it. Get out of the way here. You safe to. Uh-oh.
Great. We're all good. Thanks very much, Joe, and it was a pleasure organizing this symposium with you and Mei Ling, and I'm glad that we managed to get David's presentation via video. I think this is going to well, first of all, I'm Brent Hewitt. I'm with the Economic Research Service. Been with the service for about 1.5 years. I'm going to say that the the first thing I'm going to say is put up a disclaimer that this is what I'm going to be talking about today is sort of off the cuff, not off the cuff, some reasonably well thought out comments, I hope, but it's nothing that's been cleared for review by the ERS. It's not any kind of finished product or results that I'm presenting. It's really some commentary based on work that I'm doing now, work that we're doing now at ERS. And also I'm going to draw a little bit on my experience prior to coming to ERS as executive director for a federal statistical research data center program at the University of Wisconsin, Madison, where I was on faculty before coming to ERS. So I think what I'm going to talk about is going to complement well Joe's discussion and connect with some of David's comments. And it's going to complement Joe's discussion in the sense that he focused on the immediate needs of the Office of the Chief Economist as an aid to the Secretary and others within USDA who are trying to respond to an enormous shock to our economy with programs and policies aimed and targeted, at particular segments of the economy that were hit hard. And they were trying to make do the best they could with available data, and they were responding in kind of real time to events. What I'm going to talk about is a little bit more long-term perspective on data infrastructure and thinking about measurement of this thing we call supply chains. So I'm going to provide a little motivation on supply chains and the challenges and opportunities that I see associated with measurement and research on that topic. I'm going to take this mask off as well because I'm having a hard time talking with the mask on. And then hopefully discuss present some thoughts on kind of laying groundwork for data product, data infrastructure, and research on supply chains. So first, just to recap a little bit from David's presentation, he presented one presentation ago, so maybe some of what he said has escaped your kind of immediate RAM right now. So I'm going to kind of recap a couple of things. So the first thing is that he talked about in the last several slides, he talked about data needs and implications for some of his thinking, and he talked about the need to measure supply chains, to measure things like the participants, the ownership status of segments of the supply chain, elements of coordination across participants within a supply chain, and even potentially, transaction and product shipment and movement across actors within supply chains. You talk about interest in measuring over time the evolution and structure of supply chains and the response to shocks. And then he mentioned his implications from his thinking, the need for research that goes beyond the farm gate and for data infrastructure to support measurement around things associated with supply chains. Second piece of motivation is, what is a supply chain? It's a term that we all use or have heard a lot the last several years. Quick little query that I made, on Google turned up at least two different really kind of conceptual elements of supply chains. One focusing on the sequence of processes involved in production and distribution of commodity, and another focusing on the network of organizations and people and activities and information associated with supply chains. Well, whether we're thinking of a sequence of processes or a network really changes how we might think about measurement of a supply chain. So supply chain is a concept, and if we're going to have any kind of measurement of things associated with that concept and its evolution over time, we need to have some kind of consistent terminology and semantics for how we think about what is a supply chain, and I don't think we have that today. Another little piece of motivation here is that I know from my own experience that the term supply chain has been around for several decades. I think it emerged actually out of business schools. I recall seeing it kind of been discussed in business school literature going back several decades. I think the newer incarnation and use of the term supply chain actually is something a bit different maybe than the way it was used in the context of that past research. And I think it's also a topic that's entered pretty prominently the economics literature in industrial organization and macro fields, and especially so in recent years. So you can see that it's the term is something that's there. This is a n-gram search for Google, so it's there now in books pretty prominently. It's growing, and this last data point is for 2019. So I'm guessing that the curve is only going up in the last several years. This is in books. In publications, it's also something that's fairly prominent. So this is a Google Scholar search focusing on the exact terms, the exact phrase supply chain in the title of published works in journal articles on Google Scholar. So it's a prominently studied research topic within economics and social science domains, publishing on the order of 15 to 20,000 peer-reviewed articles per year. So these are annual publications with just the word supply chain in the title. So there's probably quite a bit more that have the terminology somewhere embedded in the text. So it's a concept, it's here, it's with us. We don't really have systematic measurement of it, in a kind of an integrated way right now. So researchers, when they're studying it, are cobbling together data from various places, constructing their own definition of what the supply chain is for them, and carrying on with their research, which is fantastic. But I think there's scope for some kind of coordination and systematization of all of that work moving forward. So if we look at agricultural and food industries as a focus for supply chains, and we look at that sort of sub-economy segment of the economy, the overall economy, I think of farms as kind of the nexus within the supply chain. So we have the farm kind of in the middle. Downstream from the farm, we have a variety of processing, handling, wholesaling, retailing activities. And there's actually quite a bit of research in ag economics on this sector. There's retail food scanner data a lot of people have used that Mei Ling is going to talk about next. There is actually a fair amount of disaggregation in the NAICS classification system for industries, and there's a fair amount of public use data available at fairly disaggregate levels on a broad range of industrial categories in the food, wholesaling, distribution, and retailing sectors. And there's quite a bit of work. Rich Sexton has done some work using those data. So there's some amount of research that we have on the downstream sector. There's also the upstream though, and this is why I think of farms as the nexus. There's a whole range of activities that's grown over time, focusing on basically, contributing to the agricultural production function through services, technology, value-added inputs, information, and so on, by firms that work directly with farms, and in some cases do some of the farming. They're actually putting equipment, putting people on the ground, on farms, working with farmers, and participating in the variety of inter-year, farm production activities that farmers carry out. So this constellation of economic actors, where farms are the nexus, that's where the supply chains are. The question we have and the challenge we have is to kind of connect the dots within supply chains. How are these various actors forming supply chains? How do we measure what a supply chain empirically and build data infrastructure appropriate for that? So just a quick, these are just to give kind of an orders of magnitude a sense of the upstream and downstream. They're both important. These data that I'm putting up here are based on some initial work we're doing, looking at just public use county business patterns data from the Census Bureau, and assembling from existing NAICS classification codes at the 6-digit level, what are clearly upstream industries versus clearly downstream industries, and calculating at a national level total employment and total payroll from those data. So we're looking at somewhere on the order of 6 million workers combined across the upstream and downstream sectors, and 25 million plus, or I guess 5 million, 50 million plus in annual payroll, and it looks from these figures like the upstream sector is actually offers a higher average pay. So there's quite a bit of activity there to sort out, and it's something that's going to be, that we're going to that is an opportunity for researchers to investigate. So among the challenges we have, one of the fundamental challenges we have for studying supply chains is that we have an existing industrial classification system for business and industry covering the US economy, but it was built for a particular purpose that wasn't supply chains. It was built for the purpose of constructing aggregate GDP accounts and disaggregating the reporting on GDP to various subsectors of the economy. It was built on a conceptual framework, which is a production function. Production function is closely related maybe to a supply chain, but not exactly the same thing. And so we have, in this context, we have a particular breakdown of industries. And if you try to look at this as upstream, you can't really think of this as upstream and downstream for the perspective of what we know about agricultural and food industries. A lot of the things that look downstream in this classification scheme, actually, when you look at the individual categories, they belong upstream. So, for example, in professional services or even retailing, wholesale trade, retail trade, some of the retail trade activity is activity associated with selling inputs to farmers, right? And the professional services, some of those things might be R&D and scientific activity related to biotech, which is an upstream production related activity. So, so to use the existing data, we sort of have to get to the business, to the microdata, and reform some of those data into groupings and classifications that make sense for the concept, for the supply chain concept. And that's where the microdata becomes useful. Okay, so we have this need to use microdata to construct data appropriate to the supply chain concept. We have a classification system that isn't built to study it sort of off the shelf. Those are challenges, but they offer opportunities for those of us interested in research, and opportunities new opportunities that we all have as a result of innovation in IT tech and in the federal statistical system that increasingly is working towards providing access to microdata for research, by external researchers external to the federal statistical system. I can remember, I have this vivid memory of when I started graduate school, of walking into my advisor's office at the time. This was Richard Just, was my first advisor when I started graduate school. And I have this vivid memory of him handing me an agricultural yearbook, an Ag Stats yearbook from NASS, and saying, you're starting graduate school in ag economics, get to know this. And I remember looking at that book and being, having appropriate enthusiasm. Saw lots of opportunity there in those data. I can't remember exactly what I did with those data, but I know I used them throughout the course of my graduate career. But one thing about those data was that they were public use tables reported by NASS that I used, sort of without question and off the shelf, and proceeded to do my research. When we start when we have now the opportunity to work with microdata in virtual enclaves, we're much closer to the underlying production data that's used to produce those public use tables. And in my mind, that provides an opportunity for researchers in the federal statistical system and universities to work more closely together in building new data products, innovating our existing data infrastructure to address new important topics as they emerge, like supply chains. So that's where I see opportunity, moving forward for all of us to collaborate in these spaces and to collectively, iterate and build on existing data to make it, to use it for new topics like supply chains. Okay, so I think I'm kind of have said most of this, except that I guess I want to, and I'm running out of time as well. So I think I'll skip that and just say that there's two examples that I've come across or have been exposed to that I think might be things that we could look to towards the kinds of things that can be done, or something that is happening in a sister division within the Economic Research Service. This is called the Food Apps Data. It's a very complicated, rich, and interesting data product that mixes proprietary data, administrative data, consumer surveys, and Census Bureau data. It's a core foundational data product for research on consumer food and nutrition and household behavior around food. And it's a product in which there's a large teams of external researchers collaborating with lots of people at ERS to build, essentially to do research, and in the process of doing the research to iterate and build on underlying data product. There's another example called Metrics, which is a similar kind of product, but it's actually something that sort of emerged out of the academic world at the University of Michigan. It's a partnership of 30+ universities that contribute their administrative data to this center at the University of Michigan. And then Michigan assembles those data with other proprietary data, connects it to Census Bureau data. So it's a mix of federal statistical system, proprietary, and administrative data from universities. These kinds of creative, innovative, complicated, and challenging as well data products, I think, are the kinds of these are, I think, the kinds of examples we need to think about if we're going to come to terms with supply chain as a concept, and be able to do empirical research on the topic. Okay, that's what I have to say, and thank you very much, and I'll pass things over to Mary.
I think I'm sharing screen. Right? Okay. Seems to be working. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for making this presentation part of your day. I'm Mei-Lin from Purdue Ag Econ Department, and I feel very honored to be part of the panelists. In fact, this is the first time I'm presenting at a symposium. So I may be a little nervous. And Joe and Brad and David have already given an excellent introduction to USDA data and how we have been using it. As you can see, I'm the least experienced out of the four. So I have, I think the only valuable information that I can share with everybody would be from a paper set that I've read and ongoing projects that I'm on. And I've been actively using USDA data and combined with other sources of data. And those ongoing projects are usually related to monitoring shocks along the supply chain. So I'm going to give a few examples to illustrate my point. The first example I'm going to give is an example where we can combine different sources of government data. So USDA data provide us a lot of information at the farm gate level, at the processing level, and retailing. But a lot of times we're also interested on some shocks directly on consumers. One not so recent example is from the 2009 recession. There were some huge income and wealth shocks on the consumer side. And of course, that would translate to changes in demand, and eventually that would be translated along the supply chain to retailers, processors, and farmers. So here's a map which I drew from with my co-authors using data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, so another government public source of data. And as you can see, if we're trying to measure the changes in average consumer income, the county level median household income, and compare 2009 with 2006, the red colors would indicate a drop, right? Decrease in income comparing 2006 with 2009. And the green dots would indicate counties where they actually saw income increases post the Great Recession. And there's huge spatial heterogeneity reviewed by this process. And so instead of only looking at the aggregate level shock, which we know that on average, of course, the income has dropped due to the recession. But if you really dive into the county level, you're going to see a lot of heterogeneity across counties. But also notice there are quite a few empty spots, and they indicate exactly the problem Joe just mentioned. That if there are missing geographical coverage if you use scanner data. And the reason why you see this on this map is because I'm trying to combine the Bureau of Labor Statistics data with some data. But if you only use Bureau of Labor Statistics data, you will have a complete map. But once you want to merge with some scanner data, you try to study how spatial. What happened? Well, oh, seems that it's good. Okay, so when I try to merge the complete map with some scanner data, now you have all these empty spots. Right? So we do have to be quite careful when we try to use scanner data, knowing that the geographical coverage is not complete. But arguably, although there are missing points, this map is still pretty representative of the situation in the entire nation. And that's about combining USDA data with some other sources of government data. And another way of using USDA data, which I'm probably even more familiar with, is to combine USDA data with some scanner data. And in particular, I have been using RI data and Nielsen data, the Nielsen which are both collected by data firms, and they're probably the most used scanner data in the literature, or at least in the empirical IO literature, which is my field. Let me take Nielsen scanner data as an example. So currently, Nielsen data offers a big panel from 2006 to 2020. And notice there is always a 2-year lag, which is another disadvantage of using scanner data. But it does have a great coverage over a big number of retail stores of different formats. You have mass merchandisers, dollar stores, gas stations, drug stores, and grocery stores. There are more than 45,000 and the number has been growing over years. There are more than 160 retail chains, over 1,000 product categories. Product category would be, say, fresh meat, milk, eggs, and 49 states. But of course, not every county in each state, right? So there's still the issue of incomplete geographical coverage. The original Nielsen data is very detailed. It's weekly revenue and volume sales by product, by brand, and by store. So as I'll show later, with this specific detailed information, you can answer a lot of interesting questions that you wouldn't be able to answer with aggregate data. And Nielsen also provides rich information on the consumer side. Nielsen has this home scan data. Another panel starts 2006 and with a 2-year lag, 2020, now available. Every year, 50 to 60,000 households are covered. And they're from 49 states. What's interesting about this data set is that they basically scan everybody's grocery receipt, right? So you can actually see by trip, by store, by product information for each household, right? So as you can imagine, again, if you want to add, if you're interested in household purchase behavior, for instance, such data set will be really helpful. And what's even better about the Nielsen data set is that these two data sets can be merged using store ID and product ID. So potentially you can actually have a really rich picture, both on the retailer side and on the consumer side. Nielsen data also provides some information on wholesalers and advertisement, which for some reason not as frequently used as these two scanner data sets. Okay, so let's see what we can do with the scanner data set. And I think the first thing is, of course, they will allow us to review a lot of spatial heterogeneity or heterogeneity across income levels, across product attributes, so on and so forth. As you can imagine, if I have the home scan data, I can reproduce the map of income shocks, right? Which I just showed using the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And another thing you could do is you can track, for instance, the spread of some novel product across counties. The example I'm giving here is the introduction of cage-free eggs across counties in the US from 2011 to 2019. And as you can see, the color code indicates the first year of selling cage-free egg in a specific county. And even in California, there's some variation. It's not like every county starts selling cage-free egg in the same year. And if you look at the entire US, there's more variation. Right? Just one example, and of course you can imagine to draw a map like this with any commodity you're interested in, right? Innovative product. Maybe another good example would be the introduction of Greek yogurt. Right, there wasn't any Greek yogurt on the U.S. market before 2008, but started introduced by Chobani in 2008, and now it's more than half market share. Another use of combining USDA data and this Nielsen scanner data is to review some correlation of shocks across stages along the supply chain. In the literature, most of the time when we talk about shocks, we limit ourselves to a specific stage, which Joe pointed out is not good, right? We should be thinking about the supply chain as a system. And in fact, if you combine the USDA data with scanner data, you can clearly see a very strong correlation in the shocks at least during the first wave of COVID. In this working paper by my advisor, Richard Sexton, and his current student, Jeff Handachek, we try to figure out what is the correlation in the processing stage and in the retail stage. Here we use two data sources. The first data source is LMIC, so Livestock Marketing Information Center, which aggregate information from USDA, and then the IRI data for retailing sales of beef. And what you can see in the figure right here, you can see two series of dots. The blue dots indicate the deviation from average daily slaughter, daily head slaughter from January 2020 to end of 2020. And the orange dots indicate the daily weekly sales, sorry, weekly sales of retail beef volume. And this highlighted part showed you during the period where when a lot of processors shut down due to COVID, there is a stockpiling effect on the retailing side as well. So that indicates that the two extreme shocks can actually happen hand in hand. There's some really strong correlation there. And of course, you can also combine the processing stage data with some farm gate management, farm gate information to see if there is strong shock between the farm stage and processing stage. Final example that I would like to highlight is that by combining USDA data with some scanner data, we can dive into some firm level or even product level impacts of certain shocks. And here I'm sharing with you another working paper by Francisco Scott, Marco Duet, and I, where studying the impact of the fire outbreak at one of the Tyson processing plants back in 2019. If you still remember, in August 2019, the largest Tyson plant had some fire outbreak, which left the plant shut down for the rest of the year. And so what we're doing here is that we have a two-step preliminary empirical analysis to help us understand the impact of the fire. Step one, we use aggregate level USDA data combined with Nielsen data. So this map shows 4 series. The first is the price of cattle, come directly from USDA data. Second line, price of wholesale beef, carcass price. And then these 2 series of the price series are derived from Nielsen data on the retail side. And what we do is that we use the pre-shock, the pre-fire data to predict what would happen if it were no fire outbreak, right? Just normal time, we can predict it based on historical data, and we draw a band around our prediction, which is the dotted line, and see if the actual prices deviate outside the band. If it did, that means it's beyond our normal prediction, right? There's some significant shock there, or at least in a preliminary sense. If it doesn't, it seems that there's no strong impact. And as you see, most of the time, the solid line post-fire stay within the band around our prediction. So it seems that at least at the aggregate level, all the 4, except for maybe wholesaling price, the other 3 stages look quite normal after the fire. But knowing that we have scanner data, we can actually track the fire impact by brand. For instance, the fire shut down a Tyson plant. You might think that Tyson is more affected by other brands. And that's not possible if you're using aggregate data, but Nielsen will allow you to do that because you observe products and you can literally see the product is processed by Tyson, right? It carries a Tyson brand. Of course, we can check other big 4, Cargill, JBS, MBF. PL stands for all other private label. And once we dive to the brand level, we do see some pretty significant impact. And they are different across brands. For example, if we're looking at the average product price, so this fire is the fire dummy variable, right? Turns out to 1 post-fire, 0 pre-fire. And what we could see is that on average, the product price, the retail price of beef products stay pretty much the same. But Tyson price actually dropped by around 3%, whereas the other big 4s and private labels seem to enjoy some price increases. If you look at the volume sold by brand, the average effect of the fire seems to be even positive. by 3%. But for Tyson, the price stays pretty much unchanged. And this is probably a little surprising because you might think that after a plant shutdown, Tyson will lose a lot of sales. But also we know, this is from news reports, that Tyson managed to reallocate most of its production to other plants that remain active. So Tyson production didn't drop significantly post the fire. But anyway, this is just an example to show that using scanner data can give you some firm level heterogeneity, which might lead to interesting economic questions. So the previous 4 examples are all about some kind of shocks, and the final sentence point that I would like to make is that the combining USDA data and the scanner data can also help you ask many other questions beyond just about shocks. And there's a very active empirical IO literature on firm-specific interactive, firm-specific bargaining power against each other, so on and so forth. I will recommend this very recent IO handbook review paper by Lee et al. If you're interested in those topics. Thanks.
Let's see, we have a few minutes left for discussion here. Let me see if I can figure this out. Looks like we have one chat here. Let's see. If we try to take the outside people who are here electronically. I can see that. Okay, well, okay. I guess we don't need an answer to that question. So let's like, does anyone in the room have questions, want to start? Yeah. Thanks. I have no idea if people online could hear what the questions, but the first question we had was, I guess, is USDA, are we planning to buy business level microdata to assist us? And actually I have to say, I have no idea. I mean, this would probably come up in sort of an ad hoc basis. We had to do something, but I think Brent can answer that one much better. And when he answers the question that he received as well.
Not sure how best to respond to questions when people are, but I guess we do it one at a time up here, but. Yeah, I don't know. But no, I would like to respond to that, Simling, because that's a great question. And I was talking with Maylene before the session about this. We actually have that data. We've already purchased Nielsen and IRI data. We also have NETS data for our researchers, for research projects we do. And in the FED, our colleagues in FED with their food apps and related projects, they have quite a large number, like 30 or 40, or even maybe even more projects in our enclaves where researchers, external researchers, are accessing those data that we've purchased to work on projects that are ERS, either research or data product related collaborations. So that's the kind of opportunity. There's a coordination problem here because we have researchers like Maylene and others who are buying that data themselves, doing the research in their own computers, producing really interesting research output, but the data and the code related to that research is kind of on its own, isolated from other research projects. And it would be, it would be really beneficial to have a place where those research data frames and code can be, iterated on and built through time, potentially into data product. If there's a particular research frame that a lot of people are using over and over and improving, then it becomes a data product potentially that we could sponsor and support and curate in collaboration with researchers. But you kind of need to be in the same space, for that to happen. And that's where I think these enclaves really have value, to the extent we can bring people in and be in the kind of the same collaboration space, so to speak, to build on and iterate on research and data. So so that's a kind of a partial answer, and there's no definitive answer to the question, but I think there's a lot of opportunity because we do have these virtual spaces now to find ways to collaborate more on underlying data that people use for research, and to iterate and potentially build those research projects into data product. Yeah.
Thanks for the question. The third question is about whether Nielsen data has been used, not necessarily by me, but whether Nielsen data have been used to examine other commodities. And the quick answer is yes, yes, yes. Because Nielsen data have been used by many researchers, and they are not only from ag econ departments. In fact, a lot of them are from general econ departments. As early as 2005 or 6, you can see a lot of people producing papers using Nielsen. And besides beef, some other frequently studied commodities will be yogurt, breakfast cereals, and I think milk products and some fruits, as far as I know. And I think yogurt and breakfast cereal are studied a lot using Nielsen, exactly because the biggest advantage of scanner data is the product level information. So it's really helpful when the product is highly differentiated. In Nielsen, if you want to study yogurt products, for instance, you can have information about the style, the type, the flavor, whether it's organic, where it's produced, fat content, so on and so forth. There are 6, 7 attributes that you can link to yogurt product. So in that sense, beef product is actually not as interesting as yogurt or breakfast cereal. But yes, in theory, you can examine all the 1,000 plus categories of products using Nielsen data. But keep in mind that there's always a 2-year lag in Nielsen data, and the 2020 data are now available. So if you want to study the early phase of COVID, then it's right time to use Nielsen data or IRI. Thanks.
Do we have more questions? Ashley?
Sure. So this question is about the caveats using scanner data, taking Nielsen as an example. I think there are several things. 2-year lag is one thing. Another thing is, as Joe pointed out, that there's incomplete geographical coverage, although the data set is already pretty big. As I show in the map, you do see some empty spots, and those are missing counties. And another thing which I think it's useful to keep in mind is that Nielsen data, sometimes they provide exact brand name of products, but they don't tell you the exact retailer name where the consumers buy the product. You just have a retailer ID. For instance, you wouldn't know whether this is Walmart or Kroger or Whole Food or something, right? And so Nielsen, the only thing Nielsen tells you is that they have incomplete coverage of retail chains. So there are retail chains that's missing entirely. As far as I know, one of the biggest is Trader Joe's. Right, you just don't have Trader Joe's in Nielsen data, but it does have Walmart. Right, so depending on what your research question is, the missing information might affect your research significantly, or maybe just a little bit, right? And I think the general agreement is that the Nielsen coverage is representative enough so that you can use it to answer nation level questions. Thanks. Oh, I think there's another, sorry.